Welcome back to Fluent English Journey. This is the place where we don't just talk about English words and grammar, but also about ideas that make us think, reflect, and grow as human beings. Today, we're starting with a phrase that might sound a little strange. The phrase is, die before you die. At first, this might feel confusing, even a bit scary. How can someone die before they die? It sounds like a riddle or a puzzle. And in fact, it is. This phrase comes from very old spiritual traditions. The most famous example is from the great Persian poet Rumi, who lived in the 13th century. He once wrote, "Die before you die, so you do not die when you die." Now, that sounds mysterious, doesn't it? But don't worry, this episode is not really about death. It's not about something sad or frightening. It's actually about something very beautiful, freedom. What does it mean to die before you die? It means letting go of the parts of yourself that keep you stuck. It means releasing the masks you wear, the stories you tell yourself, and the roles you play just to survive. It's about waking up to who you really are. Think about it this way. Have you ever wanted to start over? Maybe after a breakup, or losing a job, or even after looking in the mirror one day and realizing you don't really know yourself anymore. That deep feeling, that whisper inside you that says, I want to change. I want to live differently. That is the beginning of dying before you die. It's not about ending life. It's about beginning a new life inside the same body. Across many traditions, Sufi mysticism, Stoic philosophy, Buddhism, even modern psychology, there is one shared idea. If you can face your fears, your ego, your attachments, and the patterns of your mind while you are alive, then you can be reborn into a clearer, lighter, freer way of living. Why does this matter? Because many of us live on autopilot. We wake up, go through our routines, do the same things, think the same thoughts, and react to life instead of really living it. We chase approval. We repeat habits that don't fulfill us. We wear identities like armor, the strong one, the successful one, the nice one. But here's the problem. When we are too afraid to let go of these roles, we lose touch with who we truly are. So, this episode is an invitation. Not to die physically, but to let go of the stories, the identities, and the routines that no longer serve you. To ask yourself honestly, are these roles still true? Do they still belong to me? Or am I just carrying them because I always have? Before we can talk about letting go, we first need to understand what we are holding on to. So let me ask you a question. Who are you? Most people, when asked this question, give answers like, I'm a teacher. I'm a father. I'm from Brazil. I'm an introvert. I'm a perfectionist. I'm the kind of person who always puts others first. And those answers are okay. They describe parts of you. But are they the real you? Or are they just labels, masks, and stories? In this journey, we will slowly explore these questions together. And as always, I will keep the language simple, so you can practice English while also practicing something even more important, self-discovery. So, are you ready? Let's step into this journey. Let's learn what it means to die before you die. When most people answer the question, who are you, they usually give familiar answers. Things that sound safe and socially acceptable. I'm a teacher. I'm a father. I'm from Brazil. I'm an introvert. I'm a perfectionist. Now, these answers aren't wrong. But if you look more closely, you'll notice something important. Most of those statements aren't really about who you are. They're about what you do, where you come from, or how you've learned to behave over time. In other words, they are layers, roles, labels, descriptions you've picked up, sometimes consciously, but often without even realizing it. All of us wear identities. Some are given to us early in life by family, culture, or school. Others we collect as we grow, through experiences, jobs, and relationships. Over time, we build a self-concept, a kind of inner story about who we are and what we stand for. This isn't necessarily bad. In fact, in many ways, Our identities are useful. They give us stability in a world that can feel overwhelming. They help us belong. They give us a way to introduce ourselves at parties or feel grounded in conversations. But here's where it gets tricky. Over time, we become attached to these roles. So attached that we start to believe they're permanent or absolute. We forget that they are only one version of us, shaped by a certain time, a certain place, a certain set of expectations. Think about how often we say things like, "I could never do that. It's just not me. I'm not the type of person who takes risks." We speak these words as if they are facts. But they're not facts. They're beliefs. Beliefs we've carried for so long that we no longer question them. And when we cling too tightly to these beliefs, identity becomes like armor. We hide behind it. We say, "I'm the responsible one," or "I'm the quiet one," or "I'm the fixer." We keep playing the role, even when it no longer matches who we've truly become. The catch is, the same armor that protects us also traps us. Because when we hold on too tightly to who we think we are, we close the door to who we might become. We limit ourselves. We turn down opportunities because they don't fit the brand. We stay in relationships or careers that don't bring us joy anymore, simply because they match the image we built years ago. So let me ask you again, with all of this in mind, who are you really? If you removed the labels, if you weren't defined by your job, your nationality, your relationship status, or your personality type, what would be left? This is where the conversation gets deeper. Because at the center of all this lies the concept of the ego. Now, when I say ego, I don't mean arrogance. I mean the psychological sense of the word. Ego is the part of the mind that creates and protects your identity. It's the voice that says, "I am this. I am not that." People like me don't do things like that. The ego is always comparing, always defending, always trying to prove itself. It's doing its best to protect the self-image it has built over time. And ego isn't the enemy. It's just doing its job, helping you survive in a complicated world. The problem comes when we mistake the ego for our true self. Because the truth is, you are much more fluid than you've been taught. You are not a fixed character in a rigid script. You are a dynamic being, always growing, shifting, and adapting. If we want to live with more freedom and authenticity, we need to loosen our grip on identities that no longer serve us. We need to explore what lies beneath them. But let's be honest, this is not easy. Letting go of an identity can feel like a small death. If you've always been the achiever, who are you without the awards? If you've always been the strong one, who are you when you let yourself be vulnerable? These are difficult questions. But they are also the doorway to transformation. If you've always been the caregiver, who are you when you finally put your own needs first? If your whole self-worth has been built on being the smart one or the strong one, what happens when life humbles you? These are uncomfortable questions, but here's the good news. Something deeper always remains. Beneath all the surface roles and stories, there is a quieter self. A self that isn't trying to impress anyone. A self that isn't performing. A self that doesn't need outside validation, because it already feels whole, and that's what dying before you die is really pointing to. It's not about destroying yourself. It's about releasing the illusions you've confused with your essence. It's about loosening your grip on the costume you've been wearing so you can finally feel the air on your skin. So here's a question to carry with you. Backhand index pointing right, what parts of your identity feel natural, and what parts feel like performance? Take a moment to sit with that. Be honest with yourself. Because in the next part of our journey, we'll talk about what it really means to let go. Not to collapse, not to disappear, but to make space. Space for something more honest, more fluid, more alive. The death of the ego. Now, that phrase might sound a little grim, death of the ego, but it's not as dark as it seems. We've already taken a closer look at the identities we wear, the roles we adopt, and the stories we tell ourselves. But let's go deeper. Let's ask, what exactly is supposed to die? This is where we meet the concept at the heart of this episode, the ego. And just to be clear, when I say ego, I don't mean arrogance or pride, the way people use it in everyday conversation. I'm talking about something more subtle and more universal. The ego, in this sense, is the mental structure we build over time. It's made of all the beliefs, fears, memories, and social conditioning that shape how we see ourselves and how we show up in the world. Now, here's the important part. The ego is not evil. It's not some villain inside you. In fact, it has a purpose. It gives us continuity. It helps us navigate the complexity of society. It protects us emotionally, so we don't feel unsafe, unseen, or out of control. You could even say the ego is like a bodyguard. It stands in front of you, always alert, always ready to defend the version of you it believes is acceptable or safe. But here's the problem. That bodyguard can get too loud, too rigid. Over time, it starts to confuse safety with sameness. It tells you to stick to what you know, to repeat old patterns, to cling to the image you've built, even when that image has become a cage. And that's where suffering begins, when the ego stops serving you and starts controlling you. So when we talk about the death of the ego, we don't mean wiping out your personality or losing your sense of self. What we mean is loosening your grip on the mental habits that keep you stuck. It's about stepping back from the automatic stories, the I am this or I can't do that limit your growth and keep you living in fear or defensiveness. Think of it as mental decluttering, a quiet shedding of the old assumptions you've outgrown. And to make this less abstract, let me share a personal example. For most of my life, I carried a strong identity as the achiever. I was the person who always got things done, the one who showed up early, stayed late, delivered more than what was asked. On the outside, it looked like a strength, and in many ways, it was. That achiever mindset helped me reach goals, build skills, and even feel confident in my abilities. But underneath, it was tied to something else, fear. A fear of not being enough. A fear of becoming invisible if I didn't prove my worth through constant performance. So I pushed. I worked longer hours than I needed. I said yes to almost everything. I measured my value by how much I produced. And here's the thing, I didn't even realize I was doing it. That achiever identity became so deeply woven into who I thought I was that I couldn't imagine existing without it. But life, as it often does, brought me to a breaking point. I burned out physically, emotionally, mentally. I found myself exhausted, anxious, disconnected, and questioning everything. And in that discomfort, something shifted. Quietly, slowly, I began to see that the achiever was not my true self. It was a survival strategy, a role I had learned to play. But it wasn't the whole truth of who I was. Letting go of that identity wasn't easy. At first, it felt like a death. I felt exposed, uncertain, even a little lost. But over time, I realized something important. What I was losing wasn't myself, it was the pressure. The constant weight of needing to be someone. And in that empty space, something softer began to emerge. Something truer. Something more grounded. This, in essence, is what the death of the ego feels like. It's not a dramatic explosion. It's more like a gradual exhale. A quiet peeling away of old habits, old fears, old armor. And what remains isn't emptiness. What remains is a deeper version of you. Not the you who is performing or proving, but the you who is simply being. Now, let's talk about language. Because words matter here. When we say, what no longer serves you, what do we mean? We're talking about anything, a belief, a behavior, a mindset that may have once protected you but now holds you back. It could be the story that says you always have to be strong. It could be the belief that you're not creative. It could be the habit of judging yourself for feeling too much. These aren't weaknesses. They're ego defenses. They're patterns you picked up along the way to survive, but they're not permanent. Think of the ego not as stone, but as a costume. a costume you've worn for so long, you forgot you were even wearing it. And once you recognize it, you can start to take it off, piece by piece. So if you're listening right now and thinking, I've always been the peacekeeper. I've always been the independent one. I've never been the kind of person who takes risks. Ask yourself, is that really true? Or is it just what you've gotten used to believing? Because when we talk about dying before you die, we're really talking about letting go of these fixed identities. It's about releasing the old roles you thought you had to play so you can step into who you actually are. And that's not grim. It's not morbid. In fact, it's the opposite. It's liberating. Because when you stop clinging to the ego's narrow version of yourself, you open the door to something much wider. A life that feels more spacious, more alive, more aligned. So here's something to reflect on. Backhand index pointing at what identity are you still holding on to? Not because it feels true, but because it feels familiar? And if you were to set it down, even just for a moment, who might you become? Next, we'll move into the practice of quieting the inner noise, how to make space inside so this transformation can actually take root. Our minds are always talking, narrating, judging, worrying, comparing. That inner voice tells you what to do, what not to do, and what other people might be thinking. It replays old arguments. It rehearses conversations that may never even happen. It loops on endless what-ifs. What if I fail? What if I said the wrong thing? What if I'm not good enough? This constant activity is what we often call mental chatter. And while it might seem harmless, after all, they're just thoughts, right? Over time, this chatter shapes the way we experience reality. It creates emotional tension. It fuels anxiety. It keeps us trapped in patterns of self-doubt and overthinking. You've probably heard expressions like, I'm in my own head, or I went down a rabbit hole. Both describe how quickly thoughts can spiral, often without us even noticing. And think about this. How much energy does it take to keep thinking about the same problem without ever actually solving it? That's called rumination. It's like chewing the same piece of gum over and over. The flavor is long gone, but you keep chewing anyway. And it's not just regrets or mistakes we ruminate on. We dwell on endless possibilities. We overthink decisions. We second-guess ourselves. We worry about how we're being perceived. And it's exhausting. But because it feels normal, because everyone does it, we rarely step back to ask, is this actually helping me? Now, let's be clear. Thinking is not the enemy. Our ability to think, to reflect, to plan, that's one of the greatest human gifts. But when the mind becomes noisy, when it spins without awareness, we lose touch with something deeper. We lose presence. We miss what's happening right here, right now. So, what's the alternative? Do we try to stop thinking altogether? Not exactly. That's nearly impossible. The goal is not to silence the mind completely. The goal is to observe it. To create just a little bit of space between you and your thoughts. Because here's the truth. When you observe your thoughts instead of automatically believing them or following them, you reclaim a sense of inner freedom. One of the most powerful questions you can ask yourself is this. Backhand index pointing right, when was the last time I simply noticed my thoughts without reacting to them? If you try this, you may be surprised. Most of us never actually watch the mind with curiosity. We're so identified with our thoughts that we forget we are not the voice in the head. We are the one who hears it. This is where practice comes in. Not because it's trendy, but because it actually retrains the way we relate to our thoughts. Mindfulness is one of the simplest and most effective practices. Sit for a few minutes. Breathe. Watch your thoughts come and go, like clouds drifting across the sky. Don't try to control them or push them away. Just observe. Journaling is another powerful tool. Not a perfect diary entry, but the raw kind where you pour your thoughts onto the page without editing. Often, the act of writing them down creates distance. You see them more clearly. They lose some of their power. These small practices help us quiet the noise, not by forcing silence, but by changing our relationship to the chatter. Instead of being consumed by it, we learn to step back. And in that space, presence begins to return. You start to see patterns. You notice which thoughts are driven by fear, which ones are echoes of someone else's voice, and which ones, if any, are truly worth listening to. And then there's the breath. Even something as simple as pausing to take 3 slow, deep breaths can change everything. It sounds basic, but it interrupts the mental noise and brings you back into your body, into this moment. Because the breath is always happening now. Not in the past. Not in the future. But here. The point of these practices isn't to eliminate your thoughts. It's to remember that you are not your thoughts. And when you can remember that, when you can watch the mind without being pulled into every worry or judgment it throws at you, something deeper begins to reveal itself, a quiet space beneath the noise. A stillness. And it's from that stillness that clarity arises. Creativity arises. Genuine self-awareness arises. You might even begin to notice how many of your thoughts are based on outdated fears, false assumptions, or old habits of judgment. You might realize that the mind often resists change, not because change is wrong, but because the ego feels safer when things stay the same, even if the same is making you miserable. So here's a gentle challenge. The next time you feel anxious, overwhelmed, or mentally cluttered, don't try to fix it. Don't try to think your way out of it. Just pause. Breathe. Observe. Notice what happens when you stop reacting and start witnessing. And maybe, just maybe, the next time your inner voice starts to spiral, you'll recognize it for what it is, a well-meaning narrator, but not the whole story. Sparkles, now let's imagine something together. Imagine you're walking through life carrying a heavy backpack. You've had it on your shoulders for so long you've stopped noticing the weight, but it's always there. Every step takes more effort than it needs to, and inside that backpack, it's not food. It's not tools. It's not anything useful. It's full of old fears, outdated stories, impossible expectations, and beliefs about who you're supposed to be. Some of those things aren't even yours. They were handed to you by your culture, your family, your past. Now, just for a moment, imagine what it might feel like to stop walking and take that backpack off. To set it down. To stand tall without its weight pulling you backward. This is the liberating power of letting go. Because once we begin to see the mental and emotional patterns we've been carrying, our identities, our inner narratives, our habits of control, we realize we have a choice. We can keep clinging to them out of fear or familiarity, or we can begin to release them. And when we do, what we discover is not emptiness. It's space. Space for something new to grow. Space for something real to move through us. Letting go is not weakness. In fact, it often requires more courage than holding on. And it doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle, quiet, invisible to everyone but you. It might look like loosening your grip on a situation you can't control. It might look like releasing an expectation about how life should be by now. It might look like dropping the endless need to prove yourself, to always appear strong, smart, attractive, successful. And when you stop clinging, something shifts. The energy that was trapped in anxiety begins to flow freely again. The mental clutter clears. The emotional baggage lightens. And suddenly, you can breathe more deeply. Not just with your lungs, but with your whole being. A few years ago, things I'd built, professionally and emotionally, started to fall apart. On paper, everything looked stable. Inside, I was exhausted. I was chasing success, trying to meet everyone's expectations, ticking boxes without ever feeling fulfilled. Small tasks felt heavy. I knew something had to change. But change didn't arrive as a big dramatic choice. It came as surrender. I stopped trying to control every outcome. I stopped pretending I had all the answers. And maybe most importantly, I let go of the image of the person I thought I had to be, the one who always had it together, who never asked for help, who couldn't afford to slow down. That surrender did not lead to collapse. It led to clarity. From that clarity came a new kind of energy, not driven by pressure or perfectionism, but by alignment. Here's what I learned. You cannot grow while you cling. Growth needs space. It needs oxygen. When you hold tightly to certainty, control, or an old version of yourself, there is no room for transformation. That's why letting go can feel like a relief, even when it scares you. You're not giving up your power. You're releasing the idea that you had to force things to be okay. Think about how much time we spend trying to manage what's outside our control, other people's opinions, the future, the past. Think about how often we stay in jobs, relationships, or situations simply because they are familiar, even when they no longer fit. We choose the predictable over the unknown because the ego prefers safety. But holding on is a choice. So is letting go. So please sit with this question for a moment. What are you holding on to that no longer helps you grow? It could be a belief about your limitations, a story that keeps you small, a version of yourself you don't identify with anymore, or something less obvious. The need to always be right, the pressure to be liked, the fear of disappointing others. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying what isn't yours or what no longer fits who you're becoming. Yes, there will be discomfort. The ego hates uncertainty, but the discomfort is often the doorway to something truer. A tiny practice you can try right now. Pause. Take 3 slow, deep breaths. Name one thing you're holding on to that drains you. Say it out loud or write it down. Imagine setting it down for just 5 minutes. No judgment, no decision, just placing it aside. That small step is not weakness. It's practice. It trains you to make space for change. Rebirth. Who are you without the mask? Beyond the letting go, beyond the discomfort, there is lightness. There is movement. There is freedom. This is why dying before you die is such a powerful invitation. It isn't about ending your life. It's about ending the stories, the roles, the attachments that keep you from actually living. From showing up as your whole self, not the self you perform, but the self that remains when the masks are gone and the noise quiets. So as we step into this next part, I invite you to notice. What have you been carrying out of habit, out of fear, out of obligation? And then ask, what might open up for me if I gently put this down? Not everything you carry is yours to keep. Some things were meant to be lessons, not life sentences. This brings us to rebirth. But let's be clear, rebirth isn't about reinventing yourself in a flashy, dramatic way. It's not about becoming someone entirely new. It's not a makeover. It's an uncovering, a returning to what has always been there, waiting patiently beneath the layers of performance and protection. Think of a seed. From the outside, it looks small, ordinary, even unremarkable. But deep inside, something alive is waiting. For that seed to grow, its shell has to crack. From the seed's perspective, this might feel like destruction. The protective casing breaks, the comfort of containment dissolves. But only because something new is about to emerge. That's what inner transformation feels like. The death we've been talking about is really just the cracking of the seed. Vulnerable, unfamiliar, sometimes painful, but not the end. The beginning. And from that moment, growth becomes possible. Not growth towards someone else's idea of success, but growth into your own truth. The version of you that doesn't need constant validation. The you that listens more closely to intuition than to expectation. This is the quiet rebirth. You start to notice what feels aligned instead of what looks impressive. You begin choosing energy over approval, authenticity over performance. And that shift changes everything. Because here's the truth. The world often rewards the mask. It claps for performance. It praises success more than authenticity. But life feels different when you stop living for applause and start living for alignment. In daily life, micro-deaths and micro-rebirths. Now, if you're wondering how all of this inner dying and rebirth, actually plays out in daily life, you're not alone. Because transformation doesn't usually happen in one big, dramatic moment. It happens in the small, quiet choices we make again and again. I like to call these micro-deaths and micro-rebirths. A micro-death is when you let go of an old habit, a pattern, or a role that no longer serves you. And a micro-rebirth is when you step into a new way of being, even if it feels small at first. These moments often pass by unnoticed, but they're incredibly powerful because they shape the way we live day to day. Let's take a few examples. Maybe you've always said yes to everyone, even when it drained you. One day, you pause, breathe, and say no. That's a micro-death, the death of the old identity that always had to please everyone. But it's also a micro-rebirth, the birth of boundaries, of self-respect, of honoring your own energy. Or think about habits. Maybe you've gotten used to reaching for your phone the moment you wake up. But one morning, instead, you sit quietly for a few minutes, or you stretch, or you just notice your breath. That's a tiny death, the letting go of autopilot, and a tiny rebirth, a new way of starting your day with intention. Here's another one. Maybe you're in the middle of an argument and your old pattern is to defend, to prove, to fight to be right. But this time you stop, you take a breath, and you choose to listen instead. That's a micro-death, the death of needing to win, and a micro-rebirth, the beginning of deeper connection and understanding. Even simple acts can carry this energy. Choosing rest instead of pushing through exhaustion. Speaking honestly instead of hiding behind politeness. Allowing yourself to feel sadness instead of pretending to be fine. These are all small surrenders, small cracks in the shell, and through them something new begins to grow. The beauty of these micro-deaths and rebirths is that they remind us transformation isn't out of reach. It doesn't require waiting for a crisis or a major life event. It's available right here, in the ordinary choices of your everyday life. And when you string enough of these moments together, when you consistently choose presence over autopilot, courage over fear, honesty over performance, you begin to notice that your life itself feels lighter, freer, more authentic. That could be as simple as taking a different route home from work to clear your mind, or as challenging as letting go of a way of thinking that keeps you stuck. Each time you pause and choose differently, you're practicing an inner death and rebirth. Another example, apologizing sincerely when you've made a mistake. It can feel like dying to your pride, to the image of always being right or perfect. But that small death opens the door to a rebirth of humility, connection, and genuine growth. Of course, this death isn't literal. It's about letting go of impulses, the need to control, or the compulsion to always appear strong or correct. It's about slowing down enough to ask yourself, am I reacting out of habit or acting with intention? That question is incredibly powerful. Most of us live much of our lives on autopilot, responding to situations the way we always have simply because it's familiar. But when you pause, even for a moment, you give yourself the chance to choose differently, to move through discomfort instead of running from it. And that's where growth happens. Growth isn't comfortable. It can feel awkward, vulnerable, even painful. But those micro-deaths, the letting go of a knee-jerk reaction, the release of a limiting belief, the choice to step out of a comfort zone open the door for micro-rebirths. Moments when you show up as a slightly more authentic version of yourself. Think back. Maybe you stopped yourself from snapping in frustration and took a deep breath instead. Or maybe you asked for help rather than struggling alone. Those moments may have seemed small or insignificant, but they are the building blocks of real transformation. The beauty of this process is that you don't need a crisis to begin. You can start right now. You can check in once or twice a day and ask, what am I holding on to? What can I let go of? How can I show up a little more fully? Life is made up of these small moments. When you practice daily micro-deaths and micro-rebirths, you create a rhythm, a dance, that allows you to move through life with more ease and authenticity. So, as you continue exploring this idea, notice your own micro-deaths and rebirths. Catch yourself when you're on autopilot and gently steer back to intention. Embrace the discomfort of change as a sign that you're growing, not failing. And remember, this process never really ends. There is no final destination. It's a lifelong journey of showing up imperfectly, beautifully, and authentically every single day. Cultural mirrors, stories of transformation. As we explore dying before you die, it's worth stepping back to see how this theme appears across cultures and time. What's striking is how many traditions recognize the same truth. Transformation requires a kind of death. Not physical, but an inner letting go, a shedding of old skins before something new can emerge. Take, for example, the poetry of Rumi, the 13th century Persian mystic and Sufi master. His work is full of images of spiritual death and rebirth, of the soul dissolving into the beloved, and of burning away the ego's illusions to reveal the light beneath. For Rumi, dying before you die is an invitation to transcend the small self, to experience deep connection with the divine, and to live fully in the present moment. He writes about losing oneself completely, but paradoxically. This loss, the letting go of old identities, roles, and stories, is what makes true life possible. We can see this echoed in Joseph Campbell's famous concept of the hero's journey. Across countless myths, stories, and films from ancient epics to modern blockbusters, the hero's transformation often involves a symbolic death. A descent into darkness, a confrontation with fear, or a surrender of the old self is always necessary. Only after this inner descent can the hero return changed, stronger, wiser, and more whole. Without this moment of letting go, the journey remains incomplete. Buddhist philosophy offers another perspective that resonates deeply with this theme. The practice of non-attachment teaches that clinging to people, possessions, or ideas causes suffering. True freedom, real freedom, comes from letting go, even of things we think define us. This release isn't a loss, it's liberation. It clears the mental chains that limit our peace, our clarity, and our happiness. In Buddhism, this process of dying to old attachments and rebirthing openness and compassion is ongoing. Every day offers an opportunity for a micro-death and a micro-rebirth. And this idea isn't just ancient or spiritual. We see it in modern stories too. Think about films like Inside Out, where the protagonist learns to embrace the complexity of emotions and release rigid ideas about happiness. Or novels where characters shed old roles, beliefs, or fears to find a truer sense of self. Ancient myths, modern stories, spiritual texts, and secular narratives, they all echo the same truth. To become who we truly are, something inside must end so something new can live. So here's a question for reflection. What story have you been telling yourself about who you have to be? Are you living as the perfect achiever, the loyal friend, the strong provider, or the person who never makes mistakes? Where did that story come from? Is it really yours, or a script handed down by family, culture, or past experiences? When we notice these stories, we create space to question them. We can ask, do these stories serve me? Do they reflect my truth or someone else's expectations? And perhaps, with patience and courage, we can begin to write new stories, stories that are freer, truer, more alive. Transformation isn't only about changing what we do, it's about changing the narrative we live by. And when that narrative shifts, everything else in life can shift too. In this way, dying before you die becomes not just a personal journey, but a shared human experience, a thread that connects us across time and culture, reminding us that to truly live, we must first be willing to let go. As we bring this episode to a close, I want to leave you with one thought, one that has gently guided countless seekers, thinkers, and ordinary people through their own journeys of transformation. The end of one story is never a loss. It is the beginning of the life that has been waiting for you all along. The phrase "to die before you die" isn't about giving up. Far from it. It's about waking up. Imagine for a moment that the ego, the complex, noisy part of us that clings, protects, and performs, isn't something to be feared or destroyed. Releasing the ego isn't about losing yourself. It's about expanding your sense of who you are. It's about opening a door to a wider, richer experience of life. You're not disappearing. You're becoming more fully yourself. This shift is subtle, yet profound. Like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, you don't vanish when the old self falls away. You transform. You spread new wings. So here's a gentle question to hold in your mind. What would shift if you truly believed that nothing essential can ever be lost? Nothing you deeply are, your core, your true self, your essential being, can ever be taken away. It's always there, waiting beneath the surface, beneath the stories, fears, and habits. When we live with that trust, the fear of loss, the fear of change, begins to soften. We learn to meet discomfort not as a threat, but as a doorway. We realize that every ending contains a beginning. Every death contains life. You don't have to have all the answers right now. The inward journey is ongoing, sometimes winding, sometimes smooth, and that's perfectly okay. Curiosity and kindness toward yourself will carry you far. As you move forward from this moment, keep asking yourself gentle questions. When was the last time I truly listened to my inner voice? How much of my life am I living intentionally? What small death can I embrace today to invite rebirth tomorrow? Transformation is not a one-time event. It's a daily practice. It's in the little choices, the quiet moments, the willingness to let go and show up again. If this episode has touched something inside you, I invite you to share it with someone who might benefit. Talk about it, journal about it, sit with it in silence, make it part of your ongoing conversation with yourself. Because in the end, to die before you die is to truly live, to be fully awake, fully present, and deeply alive. Thank you for being here with me on Fluent English Journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep writing your own story in English. One word, one breath, one moment at a time.